Hi, my name is Ben Dominicez. I'm a professor of political science here at the Catholic University of Korea in the International Studies Department, and I am participating in the conference online. So I have prepared a poster, and this is a video presentation that is meant to accompany that. So I'm going to share the screen of the poster, of the PDF file that I uploaded to the conference website for the Global Studies Conference, the 15th Global Studies Conference, I believe. And so here is the poster that I uploaded, which I will present. So I changed the topic a bit. Well, more like I changed the conceptual focus of the study of Europeanization, which is an interest of mine, given that I teach, of course, European Union politics and policymaking and impact of European Union on European nation states, and trying to conceptualize the role of the European Union as a peace strategy for Europe. And of course, I submitted this proposal months before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which of course has again marked a turning point in many ways, including in the process of European integration, and raised lots of issues about what does it mean, what does peace in Europe mean, and how is peace in Europe obtained? Because, of course, as I mentioned in the paper, and this is a paper that's been accepted provisionally for publication, so I thought, I'd present this paper. That's another reason to present the paper, insofar as the paper has been vetted as being, worth reading. So the paper attempts to struggle or grapple with the issue of nationalism and the role of nationalism in European integration, and the construction of authority and in European identity in relationship to the existing, of course, German, French, Italian nationalisms and nation states and other nation states that are present in Europe. And of course, as I mentioned in the paper, and is mentioned in many textbooks, of course, the European Union got the Nobel Peace Prize Award in 2012, so 10 years ago, primarily with the focus on what it had been doing in the Balkans. And so when Russia invaded Ukraine, this was, of course, an opportunity to compare further the Russian-Ukraine case with the Serbian case in relation to Croats and Bosniaks and Albanians in the former Yugoslavia. I should mention, before coming here in 2009, I worked for 15 years at the American University in Bulgaria in a USAID supported project that started in 1991, I believe, and I got there in 1994. So the Balkan Wars were still ongoing, and in my interest in nationalism, of course, drew me to focus on Serbian nationalism and irredentism, and irredentism as a topic in international relations long before Serbia attempted to unify the perceived outside portions of the Serbian nation that they subjectively perceived as being part of the Serbian nation, Serbian territory that was left outside of the Republic of Serbia, that Serbia existed within in the old socialist Yugoslavia. And to look at the parallels and comparisons with that case and the Russian case, and then I'll bring in the third case regarding irredentism in terms of Germany's behavior towards the German diaspora territories, German territories outside of the German Weimar Republic, that Hitler used as a justification for his belligerent policies that were motivated ultimately by imperialist motivations directed not even primarily towards the German territories within the Sudetenland and in Prussia, but also towards the other great powers. That the German foreign policy motivation is described here was personal power external, in terms of this using the Kadam framework from 2001 that I highlight here: nationalism and politics, the political behavior of nation states, and the typology of foreign policy motivation that was prepared earlier by Richard Cottam in the 1977 book that I don't reference here because I don't have the reference in the text here. Foreign policy motivation, a general theory and a case study from 1977. But the German foreign policy motivation, of course, has been being compared with Russian foreign policy motivation today, which is another reason for comparison. And of course, the political actors that are involved, directly involved, of course, are using these historical analogies to try to understand and rhetorically mobilize support on their behalf from among different actors, Washington, Paris, Brussels, and so on. And so the so that I in this framework that is from the Cottam text that I attempt to formalize and stand within the framework how to compare the assumptions regarding the different explanations for the war in Ukraine, obviously, which is the most immediate crisis that we're facing, and of course, of course, this is my inference of what German foreign policy motivation was, and I think it's generally accepted that in the interwar period under Hitler, after Hitler came to power, that this was German foreign policy motivation. Germany did, in fact, turn out to be a belligerent state that was belligerent for imperialist motivations that it saw. Collectively, it saw, in effect, a marvelous opportunity to establish German hegemony under Hitler's leadership in Europe, and hence, but of course, determining these motivations was required tests and involved more than, of course, just listening to the rhetoric of Hitler in Berlin leading up to the start of on the eve of World War II. Although rhetoric is important, rhetoric is important because it's propaganda. Propaganda is important because it tells you what the propagandist thinks is the target's weaknesses, rightly or wrongly, and or accurately or inaccurately. But the foreign policy motivations of Hitler in Germany were personal power external for Hitler's rule over Europe, national grandeur for Germany, and participant excitement among the population in Germany that was excited about Germany being made great again. Couldn't resist, sorry. And military vested interests at a much lower secondary and a tertiary level, also bureaucratic vested interests and so on. But the tragedy of Germany, of course, and the discussion that's relevant today in terms of knowing how to deal with Russia, and what can we learn in terms of also Russia by comparing with Serbia, is the appeasement strategy that was attempted before the start of World War II that explained the sources of German belligerency, Berlin's belligerency, as being ultimately defensive in motivation. And those defensive assumptions were rooted in Germany was belligerent because it demanded national equality, dignity, national equality as a great power of Europe, to be recognized as a great power rather than be subordinated under the Treaty of Versailles requirements and restrictions that we know about. No army, no Air Force, no Navy, well, a very small army. Army could not be deployed anywhere on the border with France and so on. And that if we satisfy Germany's demands for equality of status, stopped humiliating Germany, and acquiesce to their acquisition of the Sudeten territory in the new state of Czechoslovakia into Germany, rather, in regard to German claims, of course, that they were being oppressed and abused by the Czech and Slovak, primarily the Czech majority, the Czech dominant group in Czechoslovakia, and that and allowing Germany, of course, to act like any great state, namely that it should be allowed to, not be restricted, have a degree of national independence that other states have. There should be true sovereignty, and also. Personal power and external economic vested interests are secondary level, and ideological nationalism, spreading fascism is a tertiary level. And of course, the appeasement. So appeasement assumed that if you appease Germany, that Germany would become a status quo power. And of course, the great tragedy of that strategy, of course, that it made Germany even more belligerent and more aggressive, because the true motivations of Germany collectively derived from the perception that it confronted not abusive, oppressive, roughly equal powers of Germany, but that basically the rest of the world was degenerate. That the Paris and Moscow and London were steeped in bourgeois democratic degeneracy, unable to organize themselves, regardless of how their size of their populations and their on paper the size of their resources, and like what they lacked was the will and determination that Germany had under the Nazi German leadership under Hitler, and that they had the will and determination to do what needed to be done to correct Germany, fix it, and make Europe subordinate to German rightful leadership, and of course appeasing Germany served to confirm that misperception, that stereotype that France and Britain and Soviet Union and elsewhere, that they're degenerates, and thus Hitler, who's espousing this degenerate image, which of course this is highlighted, by the way, in the Column and Cottom book. You know, this typology of image stereotype tendencies that emerge within polities, and you can predict the kinds of stereotyping tendencies that will emerge: degenerate, enemy, barbarian, colonial, imperial, and so on. It's described in the book. But of course, Hitler's espousing among the other elites in Berlin this degenerate view of the world, and he appears to be correct. When at the Munich conference, the Western countries buckle and acquiesce to German demands without Germany needing to go to war, and appear to confirm, you know, Hitler's argument that, in today's terms, that Paris and London are the paper tigers, and so if this all sounds somewhat similar to some kind of rhetoric that we've heard since World War II, yeah, of course, that was the concern at the assumption, the dominant assumption in the United States, and it still seems to be a prevailing assumption in Washington, and that seems to color American understandings of the European Union and NATO, was that the Soviet Union was a Russian version of Nazi Germany that we successfully contained. You can't appease this power, you have to contain it. You have to contain it. You have to show it that you do have the will and determination to resist. You resist it wherever they happen to be, including faraway distant places nobody ever heard of, like Korea, if you're an American. Hence, I'm here in this state because of a creation of the Cold War. You must contain them wherever they attempt to expand, even faraway distant places like Czechoslovakia and Korea and so on, and Vietnam, and that we succeeded, and of course by not allowing the Soviet leadership to provide the imperial glory that they were using to justify, in effect, the imperial glory that they were using to justify their authoritarian totalitarian rule, that the system had to change. Because under that coercive system, that system could not exist unless it expanded, because it needed to control the population through a combination of coercion, economic, utilitarian incentives, but also imperial glory, providing imperial glory under the name of communism, whatever you want to, whatever ideological coloring or branding you want to put on it. But basically, it's just an ideological coloring for Russian expansionism, Russian imperialism. And so that was the great tragedy. So what is the source of Russian belligerence today? And that's the critical question. Why is Russia invading Ukraine? Again, we can look for other examples or cases, historical cases in the recent past to illustrate this. Of course, World War I is considered to be, I discussed a little bit in the paper, but World War I and the breakout of World War I is an example of a case where all the great powers appear to be motivated ultimately by desire for national defense, national security, including of their empires that they had at the time, but misperceiving the belligerency of the other as a desire to displace them, right? So seeing the belligerency of the other as due to offensive motivations, where of course the other must know that I, the perceiver, the initiator, am of course defensive. I am not an aggressive imperialist actor. And so this mutual misperception threat led to a conflict spiral that escalated during a crisis drastically with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And even though all the great powers are ultimately defensively motivated, because they mutually misperceived the other as offensive, we had a conflict spiral that produced World War I. And of course, the trigger after the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the Austrians then decided that they did see a derivative opportunity. They did see an opportunity in terms of degenerate Serbia to punish Serbia and erase Serbia as a threat, and thereby reestablish Austria-Hungary's great power credentials as an equal with the other great powers, because Austria is being riven by nationalist separatist movements within the empire. Austria is not doing militarily well in the 19th century. And so they did see, because of their perceived threat from Russia and the allies of Russia, they did see a derivative opportunity towards Serbia. And of course, you can make that same comparison and I argue in the paper in terms of Putin seeing, and not Putin, Moscow. I got to stop engaging in this individual determinism that rhetorically we hear so much about in the media, right? It's all Putin, 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 right? Rather than, you know, focusing on Waltz's 3 levels of analysis, right? That Waltz said in his Man, the State, and War text that, you know, any explanation for anything needs to include causation at 3 different levels of causal analysis, including individual, but also the state level and the international level. Moscow may see a derivative opportunity to establish its great power credentials against a perceived threat, and the perceived threat is the United States. And the European Union in February 2022 was perceived as basically a handmaiden of the United States. That the United States is stereotypically as perceived as an enemy, as a diabolical enemy. The European Union serves as a proxy of the United States hegemony. And in the nuclear setting, of course, these conflicts are fought more indirectly because of the danger of nuclear escalation. And Ukraine was being attracted. Ukrainian nationalists viewed the West as a way by which to establish their and secure the foundations of the Ukrainian nation state, a Ukrainian state that would have the Ukrainian national group as its core community. And the question then emerges, of course, about what are the other ethnic groups, national peoples within Ukraine, and what is the status of the Russophone speakers? Are Russophone speakers? What is their sentiments? Well, we're finding out what their sentiments are, and the sentiments are being reinforced as we speak. And basically, this war is forging a Ukrainian national, a nation state. It may well involve the partition of Ukraine. But again, to keep in mind that any resolution of this conflict in Ukraine cannot only involve just the Ukraine, it can only involve also not only the European Union, it must have the United States involved, because I think, according to this theoretical framework that I'm applying, that it implies that the Moscow's perceived challenge is not just from Ukraine, it's ultimately from the United States. And the United States policy since the collapse of the Soviet Union 30 years ago, and with the destruction of the allied regimes or regimes that had traditionally been worked closely with the communist world in Iraq and Libya, and the attempted remover of the Assad family in Damascus, and then the disruption of Afghanistan and the promotion of the opening up of new opportunities for militant political Islam in Afghanistan as a consequence of the American presence and defeat and departure after 20 years, that this is a threat to Russia's dignity, unity, and independence. Irredentism, Russian irredentism, reflected in national unity here. So, and so, ironically, I think that basically we need to rethink. If my inference is correct, then we need to look at this appeasement strategy again as being part of a means by which to address Russian concerns. If indeed Russian collective foreign policy motivations are indeed this collection that I highlight here, this formula of motivations. Of course, the danger, of course, is, if we misperceive the source of belligerency, we get conflict spirals, we get World War I's, we get World War II's. And so, of course, that is of course, I in other work, I made that argument, right, that the Cold War was a conflict spiral, that both sides are trying to contain the other. The Soviet Union, this brutal, terrible system, was not a Russian version of Nazi Germany. It was not driven by imperial expansion. Russia is a nation state. The Soviet Union was not a nation state. Nation states are more prone to engage in stereotyping, to engage in, to pursue national grandeur as a foreign policy motivation. And it will include the United States as a nation state, as well as China, Russia, and other states. So, and that needs to be accommodated. And it kind of, if there's going to be a ceasefire in Ukraine and a peace settlement to prevent this war from accidentally escalating into something more horrible than it already is, then it requires that there needs to be accommodation of Russian nationalist demands regarding status, dignity. If Ukraine is going to be allowed to begin integration in the European Union as a candidate along with Moldova, then Russia, perhaps there needs to be some kind of accommodation with Russia in terms of negotiation with China and the United States together. Of course, with the European Union being unable to demonstrate that it's really autonomous from the United States, despite rhetorical words that have come out of Paris over the last 30 or more years. They just never seem to be able to distance themselves from the United States and establish themselves as a credible alternative pole in international relations in a multipolar world. So, and so, you know, I mean, I know it sounds implausible, and that's why this situation is increasingly dangerous, not just for obviously the people in the area, but for the rest of the world, given the potentialities of accidents that sooner or later will happen. So I think that's where I need to stop, and I will interact with you on the website. So thank you very much, and I'm going to shut down the presentation. Bye.